Welcome to week 5, part 1, lighting. Everything that we're going to discuss this week happens post modeling. So that means after you have finished modeling everything, beveled your edges, now you want to jump into everything we will learn this week. Before we begin, please note that things in this presentation pertain only to the standard renderer, so make sure that you switch renderers before we get started. Lighting is one of the most important aspects in 3D. It can support the story and convey the mood of a shot. It is helpful to visually depict the location, time of day, and even the weather convincingly. Take a look at this clip from a video by Insider that discusses 3D lighting.
This is a shot from Netflix's Over the Moon, while the film was still in production, as Fei-Fei and her pet bunny, Bungie, fly to the moon. And here's the final version you see in the film. You'll notice that Fei-Fei's skin now looks more like human skin, and the lights from her control pad properly reflect off her helmet, making the shield appear more like glass. The one ingredient responsible for this transformation? Lighting. But lighting 3D animated movies isn't only about the decisions that make scenes look more realistic. It's also about the emotional choices that turn this image into something magical. So how exactly does lighting in animation work? And warning, spoilers ahead for Over the Moon. Lighting is one of the final elements added in 3D animation, but animators have to think about it early on. A lighting artist's decisions are guided by blueprints called color scripts, which come before anything is animated. These are hand-painted pictures that break down an animated film scene by scene. By viewing them all next to each other, the director and production designer can break down the emotional story arc, and lighting here is key.
I'm trying to see in the big story what is the lowest point, like the saddest moment, what is a more action moment, what is a more funny moment, or the most extravagant moment.
That's Celine Desrameux, the production designer for Over the Moon. Celine used color scripts to decide how they'd create a contrast between Earth and the moon kingdom of Lunaria. She found that by making the colors on Earth less saturated, the colors of Lunaria, with all of its light-emitting structures and characters, would look even bolder. Later on, the color scripts get redefined into a color key, which tells the lighting team how light or dark a given scene or shot should be, while also identifying the exact number of lights, light sources, colors, and even how much shadow your subject is casting. All of this information is necessary for Clara Chan, a CG supervisor who led the lighting team at Sony Pictures Imageworks for Over the Moon.
Pretty much we control the intensity, the placement of the lights, the colors.
While lighting in live-action movies illuminates what's already physically there on screen, lighting animated movies works a bit differently. Without it, the physical appearance of what we see on screen is completely altered and won't look as realistic. This happens in a few different ways. First is a process called surfacing, which determines an object's texture and how an object will appear once light hits it. Things like roughness and shine are decided through surfacing. To put it simply, surfacing artists will assign numerical values to something like Fei-Fei's jacket, perhaps a high value for reflectiveness and a low value for, say, roughness. But we won't be able to see what those values do to the surface until lighting artists actually add the light. To see just how surfacing works to make a scene more real, let's take a closer look at the character's skin. Before the lighting is added in the shot, Fei-Fei and Chin's skin looks opaque. Once bright yellow light is added, the shot not only becomes much more colorful, but their skin is also taking in some of that color and light.
Human skin is translucent, and when light gets in, it bounces around inside, so you get this glowiness.
The subtle glow throughout the skin makes it look like real skin instead of plastic. But making an animated surface look good also requires figuring out how light behaves in real life. Animators place many lights by hand, but there can be so much light in a given shot that computers need to lend a helping hand. 3D animators do this using ray tracing, a rendering method that requires a lot of computing power, in which the virtual camera shoots out a light-sensing ray until it hits an object in the scene. If the object is transparent, the light will travel through it, and if the object is reflective, the light will bounce off at an angle. They can also use the more advanced path tracing, which sends out multiple rays at once. As you can see, instead of going right to the light source, the rays bounce around the room, hitting every possible angle until they locate the light source. As the light bounces around during path tracing, subtle shadows and reflections are produced. Take a look at this shot from Incredibles 2, which takes place in a school hallway. So the primary light sources are these overhead fluorescent lights. The rays bouncing around the scene determine the shadows cast by these background characters, the shadow of Violet's hair on her shoulders, and even the reflection seen on this clock behind Tony. Path tracing is why newer animated films look so real compared to older animations, which didn't have the processing power we do today. It gets more complicated when characters and objects are lit by multiple light sources, like the scenes where Fei Fei and her extended family celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival. Here there's some light coming from the kitchen behind them, but mainly from the lanterns above their head. That means the computer has to chart the path of each ray of light coming from each light source that makes it to the camera's lens.
There is the moonlight also in there, but in a lesser intensity, so we could feel the actual lanterns hanging above them.
As Fei Fei goes inside, you can see her bangs cast shadows. The computer calculated that the shadow of her bangs could cover a lot of her eyes, so the lighting team made the decision to break the rules of reality and eliminate or lighten them when necessary to help the audience better see her facial expressions. But it's not just up to computers to make light look real. Lighting artists need to study how light acts in reality by observing the real thing, like that in order to see the surface of water, you need a reflection. This is exactly what Pixar did when creating the underwater world of Finding Nemo. According to Pixar director of photography Daniel Feinberg, the team took a real clip of underwater footage, recreated it in the computer to break it down, and found its most prominent feature was light. It impacts everything from visibility to color. They found that objects lose their full color as they travel further into the water. Meanwhile, these light beams help guide the eye, showing the viewer which way is up, in shots where the surface isn't visible. But through rendering, these subtle light features, known as caustics, showed up on the ocean floor. It's one of the many ways light realistically reacts to water in the movie. But lighting's purpose isn't just about physically improving the look of an animated project. It also helps set the mood and emotional arc, established by the color scripts. While Finding Nemo created nearly photorealistic water, it also defied those same rules to make a scene more emotional. Danielle found that one of the lighting elements they had the most leeway with was color. So while the water in Sydney Harbor is actually turquoise, the lighting artists instead made the water mucky and green to represent one of the film's emotional low points. In that Incredibles 2 hallway shot, they weren't just looking at how light realistically behaves. According to Pixar lighting artist Charu Clark, the fluorescent lights created a sterile and uncomfortable feeling, which mirrored how Violet felt at the moment her crush couldn't remember who she was. Later in the movie, when Tony finally remembers Violet, the same location is lit up with bright sunlight to evoke a happy ending and the two characters' fresh start. Different lighting for a different mood. Meanwhile, when Fei Fei and Chin first arrived on Lunaria, it wasn't just about making their skin and outfits stand out more. The filmmakers wanted to create a sense of awe and an overwhelming feeling of wonder for the audience, so they filled the shot with bright, glowing yellow light emitted from the structure around them.
I wanted to keep a space for the audience to be amazed for when they're going to the moon.
And during those family dinners, especially the one after Fei Fei returns from Lunaria, they wanted to create a warm and festive mood. So even though there's light from the moon and the kitchen, the lighting artists chose to amplify the light from the lanterns to set the right emotion for the scene.
You can find the lights menu here. There are a wide variety of lights with numerous options that can help you create the perfect scene. Lights are regular objects in Cinema 4D, which means that you can move them and rotate them like any other object. You can't really scale lights the same way that you can scale an object, but you can make them bigger or smaller in their properties. Let's take out a sphere so that we can start experimenting with lighting. By default, the viewport comes with a default light. This is the light that we have been using to render this entire time. As you can see, it is bright coming from over here and generates a bit of a shadow down here. Now, if you take out any of the lighting objects, the default light turns off because now the scene's lighting is controlled by your light. The reason that my scene right now is fully black is because the light that I took out comes out like any other object at 0, 0, 0. So I have to move it outside of the sphere so that it can actually show me and generate that light. Now, lighting depends on your own style and vision, but there are 3 things that you should consider when lighting your scene. First, what type of light you're using and how this is going to affect your scene. There are a few different types of lights and we're going to cover some of the main ones. So if you're going for a specific look, for example, let's say a concert scene with a spotlight, you need to select the right light for that. Next is the amount of lights. You can have as few or as many lights as you want. They can all have different settings, such as intensity, color, or shadows, and it is up to you to decide how many you're going to need for a specific scene. Lastly, the distance of your light to your objects. Depending on the type of light that you chose, you need to think about where they exist in comparison to the object itself, as this will change how the lighting is affecting it. There are 3 types of lights that you should be aware of. The first one is the key light. It is the brightest light in your scene, the one that mainly illuminates your object. Because we are working in 3D, shadows are optional, but in order to make lighting look realistic, we need to at least have one shadow set. The key light is usually the one that should have that shadow. Next is the fill light. This light is used to fill in the subject to create more even lighting, as well as to fill in the shadows that are created by the key light. It should be less bright than your key light. And then you have your backlight, which is used to separate objects from your background. This light should be the least bright of them all. When you use all 3 of these, it is called 3-point lighting. This is a good base for lighting a subject. You can also add any of the other types of lighting that exist out there. Now let's talk about the different light types. Set up the scene the way that mine is. Have a sphere be at the center of a backdrop. We can make the backdrop be a little bit bigger by extending the extension right here and then moving the sphere forward a bit. It is as if we're creating a studio lighting setup. Alright, so let's get started with the light that we can just click on at once without opening the menu. This light is the Omni light. It is a light that comes out of 000 and emits light in a 360-degree radius. You can think of it as a light bulb. Next, we have our spotlight. The spotlight emits light in a focused cone. You can rotate and move the light until you position it however you'd like. This is called the wireframe of your light. And using the little cubes, you can scale your light to be either sharper or wider. Next is the target light. It works very similar to a spotlight. The only difference is that it comes out with a null called light that target. In this null, you can move wherever you want and the light will follow it. You can imagine that this would be really useful for creating things like an animation where the light has to follow a subject. Then you have the area light. The area light casts a directional light ray from within the set boundary, as you can see here in its wireframe. By default, that is a square, and you can manipulate the shape of it, but it doesn't actually make any difference in the way that the lighting is affecting your subject. It can be useful because you can make the light visible and therefore the shape would matter. The area light offers realistic lighting, so it is the one that I tend to use the most, especially for something like a 3-point lighting. And when paired with area shadows, it also generates realistic shadows. But be aware that the shape of the area light casts a shadow underneath it, even if your shadows are not turned on. So either you move it back so that it does not affect your object, or you can change the shape of it in the Details tab. And some of the other shapes, like the line, do not cast a shadow. I tend to just move it out of the way because I like having the square that I can see where I am moving it and where the lighting is being directed to. Then we have the infinite light. The infinite light acts like a sun and is only affected by rotation. So you can see this line back here that comes out with the infinite light. That is telling you which direction the ray is coming through. And if you press R for rotation, you can change this and notice how your lighting is changing. Moving an infinite light will not affect your lighting. Only rotation affects it. This is a good light to generate an evenly lit surface that you can use as a base to then build on your other lighting. Or you can use it to create like a sun outside that casts shadow from a window. The sunlight is similar to the infinite light, however, it is controlled by date, time, and coordinates instead of rotation. This light automatically comes with a shadow. To control the sunlight, you have to click here on the sun expression, and here you can change the date and time, as well as the location of your sun, and then Cinema will simulate where the sun's position would be at that time, date, and location. The last light that I'm going to discuss is the physical sky. The physical sky comes with preset lighting that you can use to alter its properties. You can have different skies. You can also control the date and location. Change the sunlight. Note that you can also rotate it, etc. The physical sky can be very useful for generating a base for outdoor lighting. However, I do not want you to use it as your sole lighting source. The main thing that I'm going to be looking at is whether you understand how lighting works, how to alter the properties, how to use them, when to use them, etc. So you actually need to use proper lighting for this. The physical sky is a bit of a cheat sheet. So while you can definitely use it as a base and then build on your lighting from there. All right, great. Now let's discuss the light properties. Most of the lights that we will use have almost identical light properties, so I'm going to cover them all using an Omni light. First thing that you have here is the color. As you can see, you can color pick it, or you can change the HSV, so the hue, saturation, and value of your light color. If you are trying to create realistic lighting, please note that in real life, your lights are never truly fully white unless you are creating like a fluorescent office scene or a hospital scene. So if you want it to look more soft and realistic, you want to make sure that you always add a little bit of a tint to your lighting. You can also change the color by checking on use temperature and then changing the color temperature the same way that light bulbs work, in kelvins. Then you have the intensity of your light. This is how strong your light is. By default, this is set to 100%, but you can change this. For something like a 3-point lighting, your key light should be 100%, whereas your fill light should be less than that, and then your backlight should be even less. Next, you have type. So instead of going and selecting another light type and placing it again, you can just change the type right here. So you can change it for a spotlight, infinite, area, and a bunch of other options that you should explore yourself. Shadows by default are set to none, but in every single one of your scenes, you should have at least one shadow. Otherwise, your lighting will look flat. There are 3 types of shadows. We're going to cover them in a second. Before we do that, let's talk about visible light. By default, visible light is set to none. This means that you can't see the light source itself, but you can see what it is lighting. But if you set that to visible, now we can see what it is lighting and we can see the light source. You can also see that it comes out with a wireframe. Just make sure that you are in model mode so that you can alter it using the little cubes. This is how big that visibility will be. So you see the light starts here and goes all the way here. I can make that much smaller right there. Notice that the way that it was illuminating my scene did not change at all. Then down here we have a bunch of different check marks. So let's go over a few of them. No illumination is really useful if, for example, you are creating a scene where you want a visible light, but you don't want that light to actually affect and illuminate your objects. So for example, if I wanted to create this as just an orb, I can make the visible light on, check on no illumination, and then make my lighting with other light sources. And you can see that my blue orb is not affecting my subject at all because it's set to no illumination. Then you have ambient illumination, which illuminates your entire object with the same intensity. So for example, you can see here that my light is illuminating this a little bit more, and there's a shadow, even though I don't have shadows on. If I check on ambient illumination, it looks like my sphere disappeared, but it didn't really. What's happening is that everything is being illuminated the exact same way. So it is as if I took a material and just put it on everything evenly. This can be useful for creating interesting looks. Then you have your diffuse and specular, and these are what make up a light. I'm gonna put a little bit of a reflected material on my sphere so that you can see better what I am talking about. Okay, so the things that make up a light are your diffusion and your specular. The diffusion is the general soft illumination that is casted on the scene. If I check that off, notice that I no longer get this general light, but I get this bright, almost spotlight-like effect. That is the specular. If I check off specular, notice that I am no longer getting illumination. So diffuse is the general soft lighting, and specular is the spotlight. Okay, now let's go back to the shadow types. There are 3 types: shadow map soft, ray trace hard, and area. By default, you have no shadows, so please remember to always apply at least 1 light with shadows. Shadow map soft is a soft shadow that is generated using a shadow map, which is a grayscale picture of the scene as viewed from the light source. So you can see that the shadow here has soft edges. In comparison, your ray trace hard makes a hard edge shadow. Both of these shadows do not care how far away or close your actual light source is. It will still generate the same density of a shadow. However, the area light does care. So the shadow will change based on how close or far away you are. Your area shadow is usually the one that is the most realistic. However, it is also the one that takes the longest to render. It can also be pretty grainy. To change the grain, you have to go to the shadow tab and change the samples. Just know that the more samples there are, yes, there will be less grain, but it will also take much longer to render and occupy a lot more of your computer power. For this class, honestly, we might be more than okay using shadow map soft, unless you have a specific reason why you want to add different shadows. In this same shadow tab, you can alter a bunch of different settings. For example, the density of your shadows. And you can be more abstract and alter things like the color of your shadows. Here are some 3D lighting examples to show you the variety of things that can be achieved. And here are some lighting examples in other mediums so you can see that lighting is very, very important when creating art, regardless of what medium you're using.